think through the channels, think through the narrative and the message, and then think through the people you're going to get to do it. People always sort of leave that to the end, and then they get some dipstick in the organization to do all the actual communicating.
Today, our focus is on the financial sector. The topic is leveraging video content for strategic growth in commercial and alternative finance. And joining us is my very good friend, David Stevenson, an adventurous investor, financial journalist, columnist on the Financial Times, entrepreneur, and a recognized expert in the world of alternative investment and ETFs. David, welcome, mate. Thank you honestly for joining.
That's a pleasure, Rob.
Today.
Delighted to come on.
So before we get going, again, to kind of the meat of the subject matter, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received? And I'm curious to know this. And how has it impacted your life?
Well, I'll give you two bits of advice. One of which is so I won't answer the question directly in typical journalistic style. So I'll give you two bits. One is practical, and then one is long term. Yeah. So one is just practical, which is I work with a colleague called Rupert. Hello, Rupert. And I think that when it comes to particularly running businesses or just running projects, to be honest, communication is hugely important. Now, something I'm involved with at the moment. There's all sorts of issues to do with communication, and running a business and communication is really very, very, very difficult. And I've found basically lots of businesses don't succeed, or at least they don't do as well as they should do, because people in the organization don't communicate. And so I think communication is really important. And you might think, well, why does it matter? Because, but it does matter, because quite often businesses fall over because the senior management don't tell the board what's going on, or or the kind of people in the cold face of the business don't tell the management what's going on. But the best bit of advice I did, it was just that because people worry about communication, they don't really know how to communicate yet, and they don't know the channel to communicate. And I know it sounds really parochial, but it isn't really, because it's how you communicate change within an organization.
Absolutely, yeah.
And one of the most important things is never do the important shit by email. Yeah. But always do.
I totally agree with that.
Always do the important shit.
Conversations.
Yeah, always do the important shit, at least by talking to them, preferably face to face. Yeah. Okay. And it's astonishing the amount of people who don't do that. The astonishing amount of things where people said, "Oh, well, I sent it in a document, or I put it on an email trail, or something like this," and it gets buried because I don't know about you, but I get a gazillion and one emails, and I scan read everything, and I've got not bad at doing it, but I probably sometimes miss the importance of something. And so the best way was just, if it's something that's really important, just face to face time. Yeah.
Talk to them. But do you think, even with emails, rattling off a quick email where, like you said, where the communication might be disconnected in some way, can be misread?
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah,
feeling in that moment.
Absolutely, yeah. And I sit on various PLC boards, and I can guarantee you the amount of times that we've misunderstood something on an email, because usually because we just don't realize it as important as it should say. Some people are good at that. They go, "This is a really important thing." They put it in caps, and underline it, and then put it in bold, and then larger letter, and that kind of stuff.
Which is basically saying, I'm shouting at you, and I want you to understand, because I've underlined this.
Yes, exactly. And people just don't do that. Anyway, so that's the first bit of just general comms advice. So comms, I think, is really important, and it won't come as a surprise to know that I used to was involved with running, and so was Rob, a comms business. So we both know a lot about that. The second piece of advice is just to do what you do, which is do what you do in life. Which is, best bit of advice was, it's particularly when you're running business, just do what you know. Yeah. Now, I know it sounds obvious.
And what you love.
Whilst it's important that you do something you love, what's really important is to do something that you've got a lot of expertise in. Yeah. And all the things that I've done are the things that I've got, I hope, some deep expertise in. Yeah. And I don't tend to stray out of it. Yeah. And once you've got that expertise, you could just keep replicating the formula. So Rob will know, but other viewers and listeners might not know. I mean, I've always run, for instance, publishing businesses, and it's endlessly, rinse, repeat, which is, we set up something, it's a specialist thing, and usually B2B in my area, kind of B2B trade journalism, usually in finance, investment markets, that kind of stuff. And then we make that work, and then we take the bare bones of the elements of that, and then repeat it again. And I'm in the process of doing it again with something else. And then So I think it's really important. Now, the other people will go, just do what's your passion or do what your dream is. I'm just not really convinced of that. Yeah. And I think what you have to really, really understand is deep expertise. And that deep expertise is really, really important. Most of the successful people that I've bumped into who've made hundreds of millions, if not billions, have focused on one thing that they're very good at. Yeah. And that they've got absolutely mountains of expertise at, and they've really hammered away at it. And they've usually failed the first time around, probably failed the second time around. It's certainly true of me. That's really important.
I failed the first time round, but that's not about
Oh yeah, no, oh, absolutely, no, not at all, definitely, no. And listen, I mean, but this isn't news to anybody. Failure is really important. It doesn't really matter
really,
if you
really
fail.
important. Really important. Okay, so let's just get into the meat of it, Dave. So, in your experience, and like you said, I mentioned earlier, you set up with some other guys. You set up and you ran a very, very successful events and video agency
Mm,
for one of the biggest banks in the world,
mm,
and successfully sold that business on.
mhm.
And big financial institution. So within the context of that, Dave, how can kind of financial institutions use video content to simplify really complex financial concepts and kind of improve customer understanding through using video content?
With care, I would say. I deal a lot with really in my journalist career, deal a lot with very complex financial stuff, really. So, the way the markets operate, the way that things like, everything from stock markets to volatility to bonds, these are all inherently complex things, yeah? And there is a temptation to reduce to try and trivialize stuff, yeah? I think you need to w go with great care around this area, yeah? Because I don't think it's obvious that it's not obvious to me that many of the things that many people do work, yeah? So, practicalities. So, number one, infographics work really well. Yeah, that's the reality of it, which is if you could just show everything in one thing, one visual graphic image, that works terrifically well. And it's no surprise that, so for instance, I do a lot of work in the world of macroeconomics and what we call macro, yeah? Um, and it's no surprise that we've all alighted upon one's, charts, particularly interactive charts. They work terrifically well. So one, infographics works very well. Two, actually, just a talking head to camera, just simply explaining something can work terrifically well. What I think doesn't work terrifically well, and Rob, you're like me, we both come out of the world of TV,
Yeah.
is that people try and do complicated narratives, yeah? Okay, and complicated narratives are great if you're like you and I are both documentary filmmakers. That works within a format that extends over 30 minutes or, well, 20, 27, whatever it is, 27 minutes and 56 minutes. That works perfectly well. It doesn't extend when you try to do stuff into, and I've done it, into 3 minutes or 6 minutes or 8 minutes. The other thing which probably will horrify everybody who thinks it's all about brand promotion is I'm not convinced that glossy brand stuff, yeah, works most of the time. I think it does work in some contexts.
Yeah, I think it
So
works in some contexts, but again, I think it's setting the context around the why are you doing
yeah,
why
absolutely.
are you actually doing this brand film? And you know, going back to what you said, the brand films, I don't know, 90 seconds to 2 minutes, those kind of time, maybe a bit longer sometimes. What is it you're actually trying to do? Are you just promoting yourself? Because if you're trying to explain something really complex,
Oh,
you ain't
yeah, yeah.
doing that.
Definitely.
Um,
And if you're using it, for instance, just as you frequently do as an opener for an event, yeah, where you're
yeah,
trying to set mood and atmosphere and tone, yeah, great, fine. And I've no problem with that. That works absolutely fine. But people quite often assume that if they get one of the enormous agencies and spending enormous amounts of money on doing a brand thing to explain something, that would achieve its objective. And I don't think it does, in truth.
no,
The other thing which you should also, I now have come to the conclusion, which again may annoy people, may even annoy you, Bob, is that I just think also just putting up loads of video from events, yeah, is i.e., panels and all that kind of stuff. Unless you're TED, yeah, and you've got, I don't know, the world's most amazing speaker and everything.
yeah.
I don't think that works because I don't really think anybody watches that stuff. I've made some of the employees of my companies watch that stuff. Yeah, and I can guarantee you that that goes in one ear and goes straight out the other.
Are they not
Yeah.
your friend anymore? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, dog, yeah, exactly, yeah. Um, And then the other thing which I think format works terrifically well, which you're of course an expert in, Rob, is things like podcasts. Um, I actually genuinely think podcasts. I mean, who would have believed it? I mean, you and I know TV documentary people. The thought of radio actually doing quite well. What does the world come to? But actually, I mean, we're doing this on video and audio. But I've run into people who do incredibly successful audio podcasts, and it's really effective. And it does work.
But I think some respect, the reason it works is because it's pretty much unedited, isn't it?
Yeah, completely.
It's that kind of authenticity piece, which
Yeah, absolutely.
everyone talks about now. Be authentic, be this,
Yeah,
be. But
yeah.
I do think with podcasts, and now obviously they are on YouTube, like we're going to do, they are filmed typically over this kind of format or with 3 or 4 cameras around. But they have become very, very professional in the way I mean, the Diary of a CEO is a perfect example of how Stephen Bartlett has taken that podcast format and turned it into something more. So that authenticity piece, I agree with you, by the way, about the events space, filming panel sessions and putting them out. I would say, where I would push against that, Dave, is that some of the, and I'm not saying this because they're our clients, but some of the clients that we work with in the medical space, they can't have all of their
Yeah, that makes some sense. Yeah.
clients. So therefore, in that space,
But that's what I call CPD land, though, isn't it?
yes,
And quite often that's CPD land where they sort of almost need to do it for professional development. Yeah.
yes,
So I think that is slightly different.
yeah, within that space. But I think you're right. The classic where we've all gone and filmed all the keynotes, and you're like, these are like, no one's going to watch this stuff.
No one's going to watch any of that.
And do you know what? We actually push against that now. So we say, look, okay, so if you spend this investment with us, is it really going to give you any value?
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
you really think it's going to give you some value, we'll do it. If you think like, oh, we're doing it because of A, B, and C, don't do it.
Yeah. Just go back to the podcast thing. I get what you say about authenticity, but again, it goes back to my point about deep expertise. There's a lot of people who think they could just do a podcast. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure I think I could do a podcast. Yeah. And I've tried it, and I've actually slightly given up on it, really. Not because I think I'm all right at it, but because I do think with a podcast, you need to be very considered about how you do the podcast. And there's this presumption that you should do a podcast and get somebody interesting on. Well, no, I'm not really convinced of that. I think just like all media and format, there needs to be a very careful kind of value ideation process. What's the value in there, and what are you providing for the listener? So the reason the successful ones you've mentioned, I'm a big goal hanger fan, so I love all the rest of the street stuff, is because you've got people there with deep expertise. Yeah. But next, you've also got people who have got a conversational style that is easy to listen to and interesting.
Yeah.
So it goes back to all the old principles that anybody who's ever been involved in broadcasting understands, which is, again, that's going back to radio,
And communication, what you were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. Radio and comms, all these kind of stuff. You've got to think about tone of voice. You've got to think about depth of expertise. You've got to think about length. You've got to think about what it is that the listener gets out of it, the audience gets out of it. So all of the questions, if you were a radio producer and you're trying to sort of sit down and picture something to the head of Radio 4, Radio 4 Factual, the reason why, Melvin Bragg has done so well or did so well until he retired on In Our Time was because they nailed the format. They had deep expertise. They had a communicator who was a brilliant communicator. They had a format that was right, and they thought carefully about what it is that the listener wanted to hear.
Yeah, what are some of the topics, basically?
Yeah, what are the topics? Yeah, and this is a crucial. Don't talk about stuff in podcasts that absolutely everybody's heard. Yeah. So I think what Melvin Bragg did brilliantly, and I think what the Goal Hanger Rest of History guys do really, really well is that they will, because everybody chases the contemporary stuff, the stuff that's in the news. There's a really interesting opportunity around just explaining complicated stuff to a lay audience.
I totally agree. Yeah.
So there's, in the world of finance, which I did a lot with, there are some really good podcasts out there where people are trying to explain really complicated stuff, in an easy to understand format. They might explain why there might be a private credit blow up, in the markets. Really, what does that mean? How does that work? What does that affect you? Now that's really interesting, yeah. But what you mustn't do is just do stuff because I got a podcast and I'm in my world, I'm a fund manager, and I'm going to talk about why I think America is going to hell in a handcart. I mean, we've all heard that, and none of us are
Million
interested in it.
times. I totally understand what you're talking about getting the format right, understanding what the audience wants, not going after the status quo. I get all that. Do you think there is also an element here of um, the way you're delivering? So, I'll take us, for example, like what we're doing today, right? So this is about our voice. Okay.
Mhm.
We have a voice and opinion on something, because I'm thinking about, like, in some of the worlds that our clients occupy, the markets they occupy, we've had a lot of like, well, that's already out there, or someone's already talking about that. But like you said, but it's not your voice. So my thing at the moment is there is there's very, very little originality.
Yeah, I agree.
What's your USP? I think all of that is long gone.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's a sort of slightly silly question to ask. So when a client comes to us, which has happened recently, and said, well, we think the world of B2B video content is absolutely dead and no one's watching it or listening to it. And it's, everyone's talking about, let's take cyber, for example. And I was like, I think I said to them, it's a really overarching thing to say there, because it's not your voice. The podcast, another agency could do a podcast like this for us, but it's not my voice. It's
Yeah.
not the NRG's voice. So I think that is important, as long as you've got a structure, as long as you understand what the audience your audience is looking for.
Well, and I think as well, this is going to something else that you're kind of insinuating, which is that you need to have something to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
An
So,
opinion.
well, even more than opinion, an informed, learned opinion based on insight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Deep expertise, like you.
Deep expertise. Go back to what I said. As a member of quite a few PLC boards, I work a lot with big PR agencies, big investor relation agencies. And, the message that comes back loud and clear from them is, it's a very noisy marketplace out there for opinions. Yeah. Everyone has an opinion. Some opinions are better than others, and some opinions are based on deeper expertise in others. But in that battle of ideas and opinions and thoughts, the way to make it stand out is some of the things we've already talked about, which is reliance upon deep expertise. Data insights matters. So going back to my point around infographics.
Yeah.
So if you could bring data insights and some real insights into trends that you can't see in the kind of mainstream media, opinions which are based upon and controversial opinions. Let's be honest. The world of social media thrives on binary, strong, controversial opinions.
It does. Yeah.
And that does work. I always think from a corporate perspective that's dangerous. And most people will tell you it, but it can work. Yeah, I mean, it has worked for lots of corporates who do very well out of it.
But I think you've got to be a very, very brave corporate to do that.
Yeah, and there are
really
some.
Understand your brand, tone of voice, etc.
I'll tell you the way some of them make it work. They do it because there's quite often somebody within the firm who's the licensed kind of opinion head.
Yeah.
So they have somebody whose job it is to basically think it through, work at it, build a narrative, build a story around it. And they what they don't do is they don't just unleash a CEO on the topic and just say, go off and be controversial about that. And by the way, that has happened loads of times. Because that generally doesn't tend to work. Yeah. What does tend to work is this, as I said, there's somebody who's a licensed person in the organization who's thought it through and has worked out what all the likely comebacks are. Because it's okay to have a controversial opinion until you run into somebody else's controversial opinion, and their controversial opinion is better informed than your controversial opinion, in which case you look a complete dipstick. So, I think if you have a licensed opinion person within an organization who does their research, thinks it through, does the kind of red team exercise where they get somebody who completely opposes them to talk it through with them, then that could work. That definitely could work. And I think what you should be careful of is getting people to shy away from controversy, because it can work in a corporate context. It does work. Michael O'Leary, for instance, in Ryanair, is an absolutely classic example, and he's the licensed opinion giver in Ryanair. And I'm sure his entire management team sort of go, "So what has he said now?" But he's thought it through. I mean, you don't have to agree with him, but within a corporate context, he's an absolute genius at doing
Yes,
that
he
kind of
is
stuff.
an absolute
Um,
genius.
and he'll say stuff that's deeply, and by the way, it's created tens of millions of pounds of media publicity, yeah, from what he's done, yeah, and I think all hats off to him. But he's he's licensed. He knows he's thought it through. He's carefully considered it. I have no doubt at all he battle tests his ideas. Well, maybe he doesn't. But do you see what I'm getting at? So I think controversy can work for corporates, but you've got to think about it long and hard.
So, okay, so just kind of springboarding off that then, Dave. So if you're going to be controversial, if you're going to have an opinion in the marketplace,
Mhm.
how does that storytelling piece, whether it's video, podcast, whatever it might be, what form
Mm.
of communication it might be, how do you think in an industry, I guess, that is seen as pretty, perceived as a bit impersonal and a bit opaque, frankly, how do you think that kind of communication can build trust and credibility?
Well, I think, for instance, you could do opinion and controversy when. So let me think it through. There's a couple of things jump to mind. One, you think you could do it where you are trying to speak on behalf of what the customer or the consumer wants, yeah, really wants, as opposed to what corporates think they want, yeah. I think that can work, where you really thought, right, okay, no, I'm just going to cut through the claptrap, and I'm just going to say this isn't what people want. They want this, yeah. Uh, that can work. So that'd be model number one. Not model number two, where it could work, which is the Ryanair example, is where controversy works because you are deliberately going out there to get mass market coverage, yeah, and you thought it through. So, what's his name? Is it Tim Martin at Witherspoons? Can't remember his name now. He's quite good at that, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think Wetherspoons generates lots of publicity from that and does really well. So that can work. Um, Number three, what can work is where you provide a really interesting kind of counter view that you don't really hear anywhere else. Yeah, because it's not something that everybody's talking about. And it's insight driven and data driven. Yeah, that can be really interesting. So I can imagine, for instance, in the world of you talked about medical or the healthcare
Mm.
complex. Um, I can imagine actually, providing a really innovative take on what the data is telling you. Yeah, could work. Yeah, that could definitely work. It's definitely worked with some of these medical influencers.
And
Um,
does that still work in the world of finance, world of
yeah,
alternative
definitely works
finance?
well. Yeah, because they're data rich sets. Yeah.
Yeah.
So medicine has an enormous well of data. So does finance. And there are people who do extraordinarily well. I mean, so a classic example. I mean, literally, I was emailing in the last couple of weeks, but is Albert Edwards, who's very famous as strategist over at a French bank called Societe Generale. And Albert is great at digging into the data. I mean, he's what we in the industry sort of call a bit of a perma bear. He always thinks that we're going to hell in a handcart very fast. And he does these deep dives into data sets, which are really interesting. And you don't have to agree with him. And most of the time I don't, because what he's saying is so kind of contrarian or counterintuitive. He's saying, look, instead of you looking over here, look over there. Yeah. That's where the real problems are.
Right.
Yeah. Now that could work. Now that's again built upon deep expertise. He's been doing it for years. He knows what he's doing. He's got a deep well of data. Um, so
And
that
is
can
there
work.
an element, Dave, there of him looking at the data sets, looking at the insights, and effectively telling the story of what that data and insight is actually going to do in that marketplace? Is that what
Yeah,
he's
yeah, yes. Yes, but the counterintuitive or the contrarian stuff is really important. Yeah,
right?
because most industries and most sectors, they tend to sort of end up sort of agreeing to a compromise or a consensus. Yeah, and this is what everybody thinks. And I think if you're going to be, there is value to being the contrarian, yeah, in the room, but it has to be based upon go back to all I said, deep
Yeah, of course.
expertise, data, and all that kind of stuff. And it also has to be based upon the clear narrative. Yeah. So, you and I both work in narrative driven trades and industries and businesses. And people, an opinion is not a narrative. Yeah. An opinion is just a piece of flotsam on the kind of life of contemporary discussion.
Yeah.
A narrative is something thought through, which has an opinion, but it has all the other things that we've mentioned. A narrative has a beginning, middle, and an end. It has a explanatory value. It has some relationship to empirical truth, i.e. data. There's all these things that go with a good narrative, yeah, but they're more than just an opinion.
But kind of, as we know in the financial world, there is compliance and
Yeah,
regulatory
yeah, yeah,
adherence, right?
yeah.
So how does that play a part in shaping?
That makes it very difficult, So there's no beating around the bush on that. It does make it difficult because, of course, the compliance and risk police will try and absolutely tell you not to say anything as contrarian. Where'd you get your data from? Can you verify all that kind of stuff? And that's going back to an earlier point. That's why you quite often need a licensed opinion person within an organization. I mean, my example, Albert Edmonds, is not right because he is a strategist. Well, I suppose he is. He's a licensed strategist. Yeah, he has that role. He has the data set. I'm sure the compliance people sort of look at what he says, but they know his frame of reference. But I mean, he is, to be fair, he's paid to be that role. Yeah,
Yes, of course.
that is what a strategist is. They are, in the nicest possible way, a gob on a stick, like a politician. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. That is their job. But within within a general organization that can't afford a chief strategist or whatever it is, having a licensed opinion person in the organization who does all that can work, and they can work out a kind of MO with the compliance and risk police, yeah, because they do it all the time and they're used to it. So like my use a big example of Albert Edmonds at SocGen. I said he probably deals a lot with clients. He understands the way they think, so he could build it preemptively within his framework of thinking and narrative construction.
What would be your recommendations for financial institutions to try and kind of set themselves apart? I mean, like you said, it is very, very noisy in the marketplace, right? You've seen that through the big PR agencies you work with. So what are the things where someone can take the world of content, podcast, video, or otherwise, and really make themselves stand out in the market that they operate in?
Well, the first thing is if you haven't got anything really interesting and important to say, don't say it. Yeah. So don't try and use marketing and comms, as a way of fighting for business development or business advantage if you've got nothing to say. Yeah. So there are big organizations that I know that keep a low profile and they focus on other things, quality of service, price. If you're going to fight, and if you're going to use marcoms as a way to fight for competitive advantage and business development, work out whether that's something you're serious about. And if it is something you're serious about, great. I'll go on to that in a second. But if it's not, don't bother. Yeah. So people feel they've got a function, they need to fill the function, and they go and do it. I think it's almost entirely pointless. Well, it is pointless. So that's number one. Yeah. Number two. So you've decided that you are going to fight on the battlefield of marketing and comms. Then all the things I've said, have a voice. Yeah. Have a narrative. Think it through. Think it through how you're going to implement that narrative. Yeah. Think through the channels. Yeah. Think through and not necessarily in this order, by the way. Think through the channels. Think through the narrative and the message. Yeah. And then think through the people you're going to get to do it, because they're really important. Yeah. People always sort of leave that to the end. They go, well, we'll work out the narrative. We'll get it past the compliance police. We'll build these amazing podcast channels. And then they get some dipstick in the organization to do all the actual communicating. Which is,
in other words, cast that person really, really carefully.
Yeah, very, very carefully. Do what all of us old broadcasters do, which is make sure you get a good presenter and somebody who knows what they're doing. Yeah. And again, that's a rookie error. They all do it. And it keeps, if you rinse and repeat. I go back to another thing. Oh, we've got a marketing department. We've got a budget. We've got the compliance piece to it. Fill in marketing. Why don't you do it, or whatever it is, And Phil is sitting there going, "Oh no, I don't want to do it." I mean, it's really, okay, fair enough. I'll try and do it. Usually a disaster. So go back, think about the channel, yeah, and it's not either or. It's usually a mixture of all of them. Think about that narrative messaging, yeah. That's really, really important. You are, as you said, an incredibly contested kind of media landscape, yeah, and opinions are to a penny, and no one cares about opinions. So think about what your narrative is, yeah, and then really focus on the people who are going to do the job.
What's come out of this for me more than anything is, if you're going to have an opinion, have deep expertise on that opinion, because without that deep expertise, there's no point in having a voice in the market.
Absolutely, yeah, and people think that thin expertise works. It doesn't really. And this is not an argument for having people who are as grey-haired as I am, grey hair. It's not an argument for only having people who have been in the job for 20 or 30 years. There are some brilliant youngsters who are very capable at this kind of stuff, and brilliantly talented. But what we mean by deep expertise is passion. Yeah, you're really interested in it. You can communicate. Yeah, you're interested in communicating with somebody else. Yeah, a lot of people are only interested in talking at them. Deep expertise is also about um, reading around the subject so that you don't just read the things that conform to your opinion that absolutely diametrically disagree with you. Yeah. Um, I'm I'm extremely interested in politics, but I wouldn't set myself up as being an expert in politics. I try my hard to read around it, all the opinions I disagree with. But even after all of that, I still don't regard myself as an expert with deep expertise in politics, and so I don't do it. So that leads me to the last point, which is know your limits. Most people who've got deep expertise sort of know their limits.
Dave, I'm going to do a little wrap up here. Thank you
Lovely.
so much for your time. I know you're an incredibly busy man and you've got a dash, but genuinely, it's been an absolute pleasure and, a lot to think about. And I hope for our viewers, a lot to think about as well.
Pleasure. Well, lovely seeing you, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. If you enjoyed this show, like, subscribe and follow us. All reviews are welcome. We have lots more fantastic guests in future episodes of Connected Minds. Now at NRG Studios, we specialise in supporting businesses by crafting buyer journeys that captivate, engage and convert prospects to loyal customers. Our team of creative experts blends dynamic moving images with strategic digital ecosystems that connect buyers emotionally to your brand. So let's partner and build a visual experience that drives real results, and reach out today and let's bring your brand story to life. Thanks for listening. Until next time.